Okay, well, we've made it to week 15. We just got one more to go. This is actually the last full chapter. The next chapter is kind of a short overview chapter. And this one is the actor networks. And I will jump into the presentation, but I wanted to preface, the presentation with this video. And, I think it'll give a sense of what this chapter is all about. So if you hang on, I'm gonna share this video I have, and hopefully this will work. Okay. Now, okay. Let me know if you guys see this. Can you guys see this screen? Is perhaps one of the unifying and defining aspects of the Arab uprising. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay, so let me play it and see if the audio and video work.
Unifying and defining aspects of the Arab uprising in 2011. From Tunisia to Bahrain, Syria, to Yemen, and Egypt to Libya, people filmed their chants and demands on their smartphones and sent them to the world. Edited, uncensored, uninterrupted, and it caught everyone off guard. To many, the use of social media in those demonstrations was one of the most important reasons for its rapid spread. Widespread discontent with the government in the Arab world prior to 2011 uprisings was nothing new. But with media freedoms and organized dissent largely restricted, people had very little room to voice their grievances and mobilize. The introduction of social media changed things and provided people with an alternative space to meet one another, campaign for change, and show the world an unfiltered image of the injustices they faced, all with a lower risk of government censorship and control.
There's a great debate on the role of social media during and especially at the outset of the Arab Spring. What most of us analysts have talked about is the three major T's, if you will, right? Tyranny, the role of prolonged tyranny in the region, the role of technology, but also the role of turmoil, especially economic turmoil and unemployment.
Everything in the Arab protests of 2011 started after the images of Mohammed al-Azizi setting himself on fire were shared on Facebook. In the months that followed, protesters across the region did the same. They documented government brutality, their protests, their solidarity with one another, and sense of control. Poor in quality but strong in content, those videos and images ultimately helped to galvanize people who flooded the streets. But it wasn't all that simple. To get to the streets in an effective fashion required organization. Where, when, and how were often sorted on Facebook. While this was not the case for all the different countries and throughout all the protests, it was certainly a hallmark of the Egyptian demonstrations. In places where internet usage was lower, like in Libya and Yemen, social media was not utilized to mobilize people as much, at least not in the beginning. It was more prominent in Tunisia and Egypt, where Facebook was used to organize protests and set up awareness campaigns. The best example of this is perhaps the We Are All Khalid Said campaign in Egypt, which had been active for months prior to the 25th of January 2011. It was an important page that raised awareness about corruption and police brutality, and ultimately used to mobilize and organize protests.
The role of images, not just going viral, but reflecting what people had been talking about for a while, led to this critical juncture. But it's not simply technology. It is built on a long legacy of activism. The toolkit of revolution, especially during the Arab Spring, was built on two very important pillars in a country, for example,
media arguably played an important role in the protest movement. Some analysts have argued that
You're muted.
Okay, thanks. So, this particular chapter and this video, I think, are good examples of what is happening in the real world as we speak. And it helped to bring together a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about. Even, right before playing the video, I mentioned Guy Kawasaki and his book on Signal. And, the video really kind of was a sort of look at social media and how it helped to galvanize some of the activities back in, 2011. And I thought it was particularly relevant because, I actually got to go to Tunisia in 2018 I was asked to go and do a presentation on open data. And so I went. And it was it was a very educational and eye-opening experience. And I'll show you a little picture that I got from going there. So this is just a little picture that I took in Tunis, and it had the I love Tunis, and it kind of brought home some of the things that were happening historically about the Arab Revolution and Arab Spring and how this occurred, and Tunis was the place that kind of sparked it, but then it took took over pretty much all of the countries in that particular region. And when I went there, it was interesting because it had a mix of things that I sort of knew about historically, but then when you are there in real life, it's a whole nother experience. And I could walk down. I remember walking with one of the hosts, and there was a mosque, and the mosque was surrounded by barbed wire, and there were actually folks with automatic rifles at that at that mosque. And then there are other places where I would go, and it was like an embassy, and the embassy was kind of protected by barbed wire, and there were people, guards, kind of like with automatic rifles, and I was told not to take pictures, so I pretty much didn't get to take much of those pictures. But then at the same time, this is a very historic place. There were some very picturesque areas that I got to visit, and I thought, wow, this is a really eye-opening. It's very rare for any of us to go from Hawaii all the way to Tunis, and it's on the north, the north side, north coast of Africa, and then to realize that all of these things took place over there. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to convey through the video was the impact of social media and how it helped to communicate and galvanize. And the other part of the video, which brought it closer to our current time frame in the 2020s, and talked about how the platforms that we are talking about in this class have been used by the government in a number of different ways, one of which is to either shut it down or to use it as a surveillance tool. And the mere fact that if you had 5,000 followers on Twitter, and I think I don't use Twitter X that much anymore. I'm very disillusioned by what happened to it with the Elon Musk acquisition. But I was close to like 10,000 followers. I mean, I would have been on that list. And you think about it, there's governments that are looking at shutting down a lot of these internet platforms, and the tie-in to another speaker that I invited, and this is the one that it was Anya from the Internet Governance Forum, and you might wonder like what's the connection there? The Internet Governance Forum and organizations like the Internet Society are there to try to keep the internet open, transparent, accessible. And what's happening across the globe is that there are different factors that are fragmenting, the internet in ways that some countries will, opt to pretty much isolate themselves from the internet. And so, there's a whole movement going on, and that's some of the introductions that I wanted to give you guys, that there's this whole deeper layer of what it is that we're studying, that as you start to look at the global situation and the geopolitical sort of tension that's going on, there's these situations where, the internet can be kind of fragmented and kind of broken off and isolated into its different silos. And you can see that sort of happening with countries like Russia and China. And so, there's efforts going on to try to keep it open and accessible. And I'll just end with this, concept of multi-stakeholder. And the multi-stakeholder model is where, all of us can participate in this multi-stakeholder environment and express, our interests, our concerns, and elevate the voice for helping to maintain, the internet as being an open and accessible resource. So the video covers a lot of things, and it might seem like almost like a fire hose of information that's all contained in a short 8-minute video. But the thing that I also wanted to emphasize is what does it say about this particular chapter? Yeah. So I wanted to start off with the video, and then we'll jump into the chapter, and you'll kind of see perhaps the connection between these actor networks and what was described in the video. So I wanted to give you that sort of real world connection with the book and the chapter, because sometimes the chapter might seem a little bit not academic, but kind of how do you relate to what it is that's being said. So that's what I wanted to kind of make the connection of. But what I'll do is let's see, get into the chapter here. Okay, so can you guys see this window? Oh. Okay, so we're on computer mediated communications, actor networks. Everybody can see that?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Thanks. Okay, so actor networks. What, in a nutshell, what this chapter really is about is it sort of pulls all the things that we've been studying through the textbook and looks at how these kind of movements might occur as a result of the technology and the social practices, and how from a kind of a grander scale, some of these movements will take place. So these actor networks, they leverage the technology, which is the platforms, the internet, whether it's Facebook or social media like Twitter, and it uses the social influence of what's happening, on the ground. And in the case of Arab Spring, the discontent with how things are being run. So what do these actor networks do? They take all these items that we've studied and collectively represent what happens when it all comes together, and then people coalesce, and then this movement starts to take place. So through the sort of analysis and study in this particular area, you kind of you start to see how sort of, if you were doing research or trying to kind of dissect like what is going on that triggers one thing and another, you have to kind of break it down. And the previous chapters were there to help break down some of the individual things, like you as a person, you interacting with other people, your sense of who you are, and then how it builds into groups and communities. But this chapter takes it all and sort of all kind of mushes it together and identifies how these things trigger and result in movements actually occurring. So actor networks, you have technology, social influences, you have technological influences, social influences interact as an assemblage. And in no single influence, it's a network of influences. So, there's no single person that's generating all of this. It's like a multitude of things. It may start with a trigger point. And in the Tunis case, what sparked the movement was that fellow Mohammed that actually set himself on fire, because as the story goes, government officials took away his cart that he was selling stuff from, and basically denied him his ability to make any money to eat. And so his form of protest was to put himself ablaze. But that is the real world sort of like a trigger. And then that trigger created a multitude of responses, and it was amplified using the internet and some of the tools that were available at the time, Facebook and Twitter. And again, we're talking back in 2011, and this is a time when I would say the tools were still in its kind of honeymoon phase, right? It was fun to use those tools, and governments were still kind of catching up to the capability of what could be done, what could be shared, what could coalesce, as a result of that. So that's kind of like where it sort of started, right? And that's why I wanted to have that little video and share a little bit about Arab Spring, which is kind of taking it back to 2011. So these actor networks, you have the computer technology, you have these tools, these computer mediated platforms that we use, and then you have these social practices which result in us and how we interact with our colleagues and comrades and friends and family. So the CMC network, you have technology, social influences, and they shape how we use any of these tools. You have access to email, text, social media, video conferencing. So all of this stuff, right? All of this stuff. Back in 2011, there wasn't any real Zoom. So it was probably more just email, text, and things like Facebook. But that goes to what Guy was talking about, and his strong interest in getting people to pay attention to platforms like Signal, right? Because back then, using email or using text and using your smartphone, even back then, I mean, I think it was pretty basic kind of smartphones, but you could still use SMS and texting. And you bring that up to 2025, and there are surveillance efforts that could look at what it is that you're sending on SMS, whether it's like text, just basic text messaging, even like WhatsApp and some of the other ones. His book is about how Signal is a stronger encryption and less information from a metadata standpoint. So anyway, that's it's all relevant to how things have progressed. The CMC is not passive as a constrained medium. It actively coordinates communication action. It mediates communication and social action. So as a tool, right, it's not a passive tool. It's actually contributing to the ability for all of us to communicate. So again, this graph or this graphic describes how the technology, and on one side of the picture, and then the social practices on the other side, and how over the course of this book we talk about social media platform constraints, and you have these relationships and experiences and interactions and implications, and ultimately impacts the human kind of reaction as a result of this. So constraints, these constraints were the ones that we first talked about, right? So we have media richness, the cues and the feedback and the language. You have media naturalness, media synchronicity. These are all the things that contribute to how we interpret whatever messages that are coming across. You have affordances, they influence personal identity, presence, propinquity. These experiences also modify the constraints. And then we'll get into some more examples, toward the end of the chapter, but this environment, and you can see many examples how it's contributed to movements that's taken place that involve a number of people. So again, kind of similar graph here, interacting influences. So all of this stuff, the book initially, we looked at each one of these items kind of individually, but they all sort of in real time interact and create sort of this environment. And over the course of the movement that takes place, it'll morph into a different thing as we go along the timeline. And harken back to the video, the use of social media has changed since the 2011 timeframe, and has been recognized as governments become more aware of it. It becomes another surveillance tool. So these are all sort of the ebbs and flows of how these tools are being used to kind of garner communities and movements that occur. Okay, so actors and agency. Each element of network affects the practice. So everything that we talk about has some influence, in the ultimate creation of this movement. Actor networks does not make a distinction between intent and influence. So all of the communications, it does not necessarily make a distinction, but ultimately the people that are involved with any of that communication ultimately will, take a stand on it. So humans act with intent, and there are unintended consequences as a result of that. actor networks go beyond intentionality and to an effect. The interaction technology and social habits affects the CMC. So interaction technology, all of these things that enable us to convey a message is what ultimately has an effect on these social habits. So technology, cognitive, social influences interact and affect the CMC. So actants are things that will be used as a kind of something that will take an action. So you got person, you have technology, relationships, assemblages. These are actants. Eliminates distinction with intent and influence. Effects of combined action of network assemblages. So again, a lot of words that basically result in there's a lot of things that are going on, and they're all going on simultaneously, because the things that trigger and are part of this kind of classification of actants could be anything from a person to a technology to a relationship. So you have multiple technology and social influences mediate the action. And these are all happening simultaneously. And actor networks analyze mediation and outcomes. So like the video, what oftentimes happens is that there's some analysis of some of these movements, and it's an interesting sort of view and perspective on how the tools and the platforms impact, what gets done as a result of whatever the environment or situation is. You have these mediators. Each influence in these actor networks is a mediator. So the actor networks transform actions. Technology, social mediators produce outcomes, and then actor network analysis. So we'll get into some other examples in a little while, but you'll see how certain kind of triggers will result in kind of a mass reaction, and that's similar to what has happened with the Arab Spring. Configuration. So you have patterns of influences and effects of actor networks. Influences affect communications in the medium, so transform, resulting in communications practices. And the communication practices are the collective outcome. Okay. So this particular graph just kind of helps further define, what these terms refer to. You have, these actions, outcomes, implications of actions, non-intentions of actors create agency. You have agency, which is, your ability to do something. So coalitions of technological and social influences form this actor network. And then you have the actor network assemblages of technological and social coalitions of influential actants. So these are the things that sort of come together. Could be a combination of the technologies and the people and the social influences, that ultimately altogether becomes this actor network. And you have these actants. These actants are the things within the environment, influences acting and acted upon each other in a network of mediators. Mediators, they modify, transform the network action. So they kind of help determine what takes place. And configuration of influences and implications continue the constitutive of the social reality. And again, that's basically what is the outcome of all of this stuff happening together, almost kind of simultaneously. So as we get into some of the analysis, you have the complexity of these social and the active role of technology. You have technology shapes communications and social practices. Technology change interacts with social practices to affect the communication. So a lot of this is, you know, evolving over time, and I would say that it's gotten much more complex in 2025 than it was in 2011. And, you know, you have all kinds of different platforms, different tools, even to the extent where you can create kind of this misinformation as well, right? So what is different today than it was like in 2011 was that in 2011, a lot of the video was raw, actual footage. You didn't have as much people presenting things that were, you know, either AI generated or taken out of a timeline, right? There was probably, I would venture to say, you know, less misinformation because it was done so close to the timeline, and the footage was you know, pretty real, pretty raw. So you have technology, you have all the stuff that's happening, you know, inside the environment, and then the social practice and the influences that ultimately happen. And the thing that I wanted to conclude on the misinformation is that in 2025 there is so much more opportunity for misinformation with tools like AI that it has become so much more complex. I think of the video AI generated that President did on him flying some, you know, F-22 jet and dumping a bunch of poop on people. I mean, to me, that contributes to some of this, you know, movement that's taking place, and that as a singular event is part of a whole bunch of other things, right, that are all happening simultaneously. So you can see where it gets extremely complex, but you will also see coalescing of movements that are taking place, you know, right now. You know, Tennessee, they're all going to vote. They're now going to vote and choose a new House of Representatives to represent Tennessee. You know, how does all of this stuff impact voters as they go out and vote? You know, that's yet to be seen. So in practice, this is one of the examples that is talked about. You have this company called Enron, and Enron is an energy commodities corporation. And this analysis was done on some of the email that was studied over the history of this company's sort of checkered past. So it's a highly successful company, but involved in an accounting fraud and corruption. And prior to the corruption, the emails that were analyzed, it was valued for employees and their ability to express their feelings. And so it's non-personal, text-based, persistent broadcast. So what the study did was look at how did the email culture change realization of the fraud and corruption of the company, and compared to what happened afterwards. And again, this is, you know, in this actor network kind of review, we're looking at the platform being primarily email and text. So there's all text-based. There's no real video. There's no real emojis per se. There's no sort of synchronous communication. So email culture, analyze email traffic during this 2 different time periods. So you have this stable culture and the prior to the allegations of fraud and corruption, there was a culture of sort of greed because everybody was, trying to make money. Conformity, everybody was on board. There was competition. So there was kind of the corporate environment. And then when the corruption was revealed and the fraud and the what ultimately put Enron out of business, there was a rapid change in this email culture, and it became unrestrained, hostile, and vitriolic. And it involved involvement increased. So there's a lot more. You had disconnected people via email. You had competitive greed ideology shifts to personal ethics. Okay, so prior to the fraud, people were all kind of on the same page to try to make more money, and then after the fraud was realized, people fell onto their their high horse of personal ethics. Coalition, political strength of new employee group. So again, the culture changed between pre-corruption and then post-realization of corruption. Now, this is an example of another environment that I remember, this whole Boston bombers, and this was a marathon that was taking place. And then there was a bomb explosion, that occurred, and this was kind of reported on social media, and there was a lot of photos and interpretation of the photos, and then the FBI shared surveillance camera photos of bombers and asked the public for help. And then Reddit, where a lot of this sort of dialogue oftentimes takes place, there's posted comments, opinions, threads, there's name, and it resulted in harassment of some people and the sharing of information. And I identify missing college student as a suspect, and the FBI identifies the real suspect. And so what happened was that because the FBI had made some surveillance photos available, people took it upon themselves to analyze those photos and try to identify people in those photos. And what ended up happening was that they identified a college student, and then that became a subject of like a huge not only search, but it resulted in false accusation, right? And then the FBI identifies the real suspect. So the whole actor network environment, right? There's like a multitude of people. There's things that feed this organic nature of people wanting to solve this problem, and then there's actants, that help to identify like who they assume, were the perpetrators. And then there's assumptions that get made as a result of that, which results in false accusation. So that's another example of how some of the technology platforms can be used and result in sort of misguided decisions. This one is the Bangkok shrine bombers. This Pantip community investigated Bangkok shrine bombers, revealing social political bias, and this was another example of how the Thai folks said that it couldn't be a Thai person because like the Thai person wouldn't do this. Thais are Buddhists, and no Buddhist would attack a shrine, and then failed to identify actual bombers. And then the Thai police arrested 2 Uyghur Muslims, and then misinformation, false leads, shame, and it ended up shaming some innocent people. So these technology assumptions, practices, internet, cell phone, surveillance, social media, make all of these sort of investigations possible. You have technology enables these actor networks on these social media sites. Rumor mixes with fact, and then you have empirical evidence. But oftentimes the empirical evidence doesn't come in till later, right? Because the only people that are really getting empirical evidence are the, could be the police or the investigators. And so everybody else is kind of jumping to some conclusions. And that's why sometimes these rumors mixes, with facts. You have this technology facilitates construction of social reality, which is based on concerns and evidence, and then false accusations, harassment, failure. So again, all of this stuff is happening, kind of simultaneously. So it offers a very kind of fertile ground for study and investigation. And I think as it gets more complicated, it becomes more interesting to those that are interested in studying this, either as a academic view or from the standpoint of being a kind of social media sleuth or trying to decipher like what is going on, leveraging these tools. So you have WhatsApp, silence, relationship culture. So silence in WhatsApp exchanges. So a manager uses WhatsApp to text this truck driver. The truck driver doesn't respond, making, is it because they're making a delivery or ignoring, the manager's text. So again, these situations kind of result in interpretations. How do you interpret silence? You have personal, social, cultural interpretations, technology use, you have personal intent, social dynamics. Actor networks describe these mediating influences. So this is just an example of, what is our sort of social culture imply if somebody doesn't respond, in this case, WhatsApp. Now, I started to use Signal in some of my communications, and sometimes the response is immediate, sometimes it's not. But you also got to remember, in the case that I have used, I'm oftentimes signal communicating to somebody that's out of our time zone. And they may be out of our time zone. They could be in Asia someplace, or they could be in Europe someplace. So that's another thing to consider, where exactly are the folks that you're communicating with, and is there a, you know, a time difference? And what this also brings me back to is, you know, some of the work that I'm doing, and I've shared a little bit with the class, and if you guys are all any interest in some of the global things that are going on, you know, I would recommend groups like the Internet Society or the Internet Governance Forum, and we can talk about this more, you know, like next week as we kind of close out the class. But you know, there's a lot of things that if you're interested in this particular topic, you know, places that we could further explore. So these actor networks, more analysis, critiques revolve around the concept of human agency. You have agency, which is the responsibility, the ethics, the intent, the meaning. You have the technology, you know, which is an innovation, but it has no agency per se. You have this non-human influence. There's no intentionality, no agency, no ethics or meaning in the technological influences. And then, you know, this observable outcomes, the difference between human intent and the goal is achieved, whatever the goal might be. Technology affects communication practices as much as the human intent. So agency within technology, capability and constraint. Humans enact agency through technological influences, and then technological and social influences interact to affect the outcome. So kind of summarizing, you know, in any of these examples that we've just talked about, you can get pretty, you know, big sort of actor network results. If you take things like, you know, Arab Spring as an example. Another one I was looking into was the umbrella revolution that took place in Hong Kong. You know, that was also heavily reliant on these technologies. But as I mentioned, you know, government is catching up, and there's sort of some of these fragmentation that's occurring that is affecting, you know, how the internet that we know it is sort of evolving and changing. So I'll be keeping track of a lot of these things, but that's kind of like the, you know, the summary of this chapter. And again, it sort of kind of brings together all the stuff that we've been studying and presents it in somewhat academic terms. And it's a way to sort of break down some of the large movements that involve a multitude of individuals, a multitude of technologies, a multitude of, you know, information that's being conveyed, and then ultimately impacts actions that result from that coalescing of all this technology and people. So you'll see this happen all the time, and it's a really kind of interesting topic, from, you know, like Black Lives Matter to right now there's a pretty you know, vocal movement called the Occupy Democrats. There's all kinds of stuff going on, and a lot of it leverages, you know, these technologies. So anyway, any questions? Any questions?
I'm curious as to how the government can shut down the internet.
That's a good question. So, you know, we are kind of spoiled in the U.S. because, you know, we still have the ability to have certain, basically, laws that prevent the shutting down of these communication tools. Now, I say that, with also the to be careful about, the impact of this particular administration on things like the media, and how you might, let's say, take your question and say, how could a country shut down let's say, a television station or a media company, right? And you can see some of that happening in the U.S. Now, to answer your question, how can a country disconnect the internet? So the internet is run on these communication links. You can think of it as like fiber optic links, and the fiber optic links span the ocean, and then they land somewhere like in let's say in Hawaii's case, right? They land, and then the fiber optic that's carrying the signals go into a router, and then the router identifies where does that packet need to go, and they're all located in data centers. So a country could actually have control over a data center, and you could pick any, authoritarian country, and if they were to send out instructions to disconnect that router from the backbone, then you would then disconnect the internet. Now, the likelihood of that happening here in the U.S. or in Hawaii, I would venture to say is unlikely, but you'll see examples of, maybe a fiber outage that would disconnect an inter-island fiber link to another island, and that has caused, like in the case of Kauai back in 2019, the island to not have internet or phone service. So there's ways of doing it. It could be natural, or it could be man-made. There could be a man-made way would be, it could be an order that's given from an authoritarian sort of figure, or it could be done through a cyber attack, and you could have a cyber attack or some attack that takes the network out. I mean, and you can think of it like, if you know where some of the cable landings are, and perhaps wanted to affect communications on that island, you could potentially, through nefarious means, right, kind of disconnect the cable landings. I'm not suggesting this to anybody, but if you were to go and look at where some of the fiber optic links are, even on your telephone pole, right? I mean, they're not really that protected. I mean, you could easily disconnect a fiber connection, and perhaps a whole section of the neighborhood would lose their connection. So there are ways, right? There are ways. I hope that answers your question, Jim.
Yeah, it's very complex. I thought the airway was free, just like breathing,
Yeah. No, it's. I mean, there's sort of alternative paths that you could take, that a packet, if let's say one router was, if there's multiple paths into the country, and one set of routers is taken out, there are potentially other routes to take. But if the country is under a tight control, and I would say, countries like China might be an example of this, they could send out an order and have all of the routers, kind of like disconnected from the outside. It could happen. Now, it could also happen where,
The country that combined is
what's that again?
North Korea. North Korea would
Think
be
that?
one.
Yeah. And there's also, ways of filtering out specific applications. Like, you can't use Facebook in China. It can filter stuff like that. Anyway, we'll have another speaker on Thursday. So that'll be our last speaker, and it'll be a good discussion. He's more of a PR kind of person, so how do they manage positive and negative kind of messaging? But we'll have that on Thursday. So in the meantime, hope you guys all have a great rest of your week, and then we'll see you back here on Thursday. Okay, aloha everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.